I was 17, and I wore my Flintstones t-shirt because I told my mom I'd wear a shirt and tie for picture day. It was 2 weeks before my senior year started. And I went in, I got my picture taken. Wonderful picture. And then afterwards, you go and you sign up for your classes. It was the last time I would sign up for classes for my public education. And I went through and I started signing up for my classes, and I took my last math class. I signed up for my last math class that I had to take, and then my science class, and so on and so forth. So I got all my pre-required classes signed up. And then I had one slot left. And I had it narrowed down to two choices. I had it narrowed down to a study hall or advanced ceramics with Mrs. Grog. And you see, I love the arts. I always have. And so what did I choose? Well, I chose study hall. Why, you may ask? Well, I'll tell you. At my school, just down the street at Belmont High School in Decatur, Indiana, if you took 8 art classes and got an A in all 8, then whenever you get your degree, you get a special certificate. And that certificate was for the excellence in the arts. And to me, at that time in my life, I saw that certificate for excellence in the arts as a laziness certificate. I saw that whenever I went across the stage to receive that degree and they announced that I had that certificate among my peers, that they would see me as lazy and didn't care about academics, right? And so at this point in my life, I'm a far way away from that, and I wanted to reflect a little bit on what led me to that moment as a 17-year-old. So let's go through that journey a little bit, and I've learned a lot by going through this journey. Maybe if you come along with me for a second, you'll learn a thing or two as well. So Pablo Picasso said, "Every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist when we grow up." I think he was on to something, right? So I think to better understand how I got that way at 17, we need to go back a little bit. We need to go back to when I was 5. Now, when I was 5, I was obsessed with magic. I couldn't get enough, right? And I remember going to a magic shop, and I saw this. And it was a little box that you'd put things in it, and they would disappear. You would show it empty, and then it would reappear. And I loved it. But having the finances of a 5-year-old, I couldn't afford it. So I come home, and the next morning I'm sitting down having my Lucky Charms, and I realize something. That corner of that Lucky Charms box is a lot like that box. And so I get out my scissors, I start cutting it apart, get out some old white masking tape and tape it all together, and I had my first magic trick. Soon the tape dissolved and the box collapsed in my little keep drawer. And eventually, for my birthday, my parents got me this box, right? And I continued to love magic, and I would start to do shows. On my 10th birthday, I did 2 shows, one in the morning for kids and one in the evening for adults, right? Because it was just what I loved, right? That's what I wanted to do for my birthday, is do shows for people and do these different things. And so I think the question is, between that moment of a 5-year-old and that moment as a 17-year-old, what was lost? And I think the answer is this sense of awe and wonder. And so this journey that I've been going on to try to figure that out led me to that place of awe and wonder. And so I wanted to look into that. What is that awe and wonder? And I think what I'm realizing is right now I'm a filmmaker, right? And I make short films, and I'm always questing after that same feeling. I've realized this after doing this for about 10 years, is that I'm always questing for that feeling of awe and wonder and to evoke that. So what is awe and wonder? That's the question I had to ask myself. And I think the answer is this: awe is the light, and wonder is the darkness, right? So every time I decide something to put on screen, I'm choosing between what to put in the light and what to put in the darkness. Every time a trick is done, we're choosing what is in the light, what's the thing you're seeing, and what's in the darkness. And so I started to pursue this idea. I started to look into it, and I found a few people who have gone on this similar journey, and I've learned a thing or two, and I want to share them with you. And the first one was a magician named Derek Delgadio, who is currently off Broadway doing a one-act show. And he had a very similar experience, and it kind of blew my mind whenever I heard him say it. He talked about the first magic trick he saw, and it was the moment whenever a man put a lighter in his hand and it disappeared, and it filled him with wonder. And he said this about the wonder that he felt. He said, "What I come to realize is that the moment of wonder wasn't whenever I saw the hand empty. The moment of wonder was whenever he closed his hand, and for just a moment, I knew when he opened his hand, that lighter was going to be gone. And in that moment, that magic wasn't a trick. It was a synonym for hope." A synonym for hope. This awe and wonder, light and darkness. If we can find in that darkness those moments that the light is coming, we see that synonym of hope threading that through. There's something important there. So then I went back and I looked into a little bit more, and it turns out I'm not the only filmmaker that's moved from this kind of interest in magic to film. If we look back, maybe you've seen the movie Hugo, which the movie Hugo is very loosely based on the filmmaker George Méliès. And George Méliès was a very early silent filmmaker. And in the beginning, film was very novel. So you could have a short little film, a clip of a train coming into the station, and everybody was like, "That's amazing, it's a train, and it's on film, and I'm watching it. That's incredible." But George Méliès came along, and he was one of the first to start to tell stories with film. And so if you see, it's very clear him playing with dark and lightness here. He was originally a stage magician, and then he moved on to do some of that in the film world, and he was always playing with how to do these illusions with film. And so this is a clip from one of his most famous films where there's a story of these people going to the moon. And so that's the first step in the storytelling, where he was trying to take the light and the darkness and play with it with story to tell these stories. But I don't think it ends with just magicians. I think there's some magic in every piece of art that's ever been created. Maybe you recognize this painting. This painting is called the Salvator Mundi. And the Salvator Mundi just went last summer for $500 million. It was the most expensive painting ever sold. And the reason is it's a lost Da Vinci. There's about 15 Da Vinci paintings known in the world. And this one was painted over. It was hidden in somebody's house. Nobody knew what it was. And then eventually they scraped off a layer of paint and they found this painting behind it. And they realized it was actually done by Leonardo da Vinci, one of the most famous painters, even though he only has those 15 paintings. And so what's amazing here is the magic trick that Leonardo da Vinci is doing here. And I was blown away whenever I started looking into it. What he's doing here is something that wasn't even known at the time. He was playing with optics. And what he did here was, if you look closely at the hand, he puts the hand into focus. And there's a whole talk worth about the meaning behind this hand gesture that this picture of Christ is saying. And so he puts that in the light. He puts that in the focus. And then he takes the face and he puts it in the darkness and a smokiness and out of focus. And so hundreds of years before the invention of optics, he's playing with this illusion. Now your iPhone is trying to fake that effect, right? Where it puts your whatever is in the foreground in focus and whatever is in the background out of focus. And so he's doing this well before we could ever fake it with iPhones, let alone do it at all with optics. And if we go back even further, maybe you're a believer, maybe you're not, but I think either way, if you look at the beginning of the Bible, it says, in the beginning, God created, right? He does a magic trick. He creates. He makes something. And then what does he do? He separates the light from the darkness. Or maybe the Big Bang is more what you're about. What is that? That's the light coming out of the darkness. It's the first thing. It's the first movement, is this separation of darkness and light. So if we start recognizing that, we can start recognizing it in every single story we tell, in every single interaction we have. And so I want you to just take a moment to think about that time that you've experienced one of those moments of awe and wonder. And maybe it was a play, maybe it was a song, maybe it was just a really good steak. But I want you to put that in your mind for a second and just close your eyes. And think about that moment when about 3/4 of the way through that steak or that song or that play, and that moment when the hair on your arms stuck up a little bit and you got goosebumps and it moved you to your core. See, I had one of those moments pretty recently. I was driving and I was listening to This American Life with Ira Glass. Maybe you're familiar. It's a radio show on National Public Radio. And he also had this experience of being a childhood magician before getting into radio. And he was doing a show on magic, so he decides to unpack it a little bit. A little bit like I was currently trying to do for this talk. And so he starts going through and he's interviewing some people about his childhood magician and talking to some other people. And he ends up going to a friend of his mom who hired him quite a few times to do these little shows for some birthday parties and different things. And he asked this question and it stopped me in my tracks. And I just want to take just a second to actually listen to that interview, because in that interview, he asked a very simple question. He asked, was I any good? And the answer kind of changed everything for me. Let's go ahead and take a listen.
Well, this is the thing I was trying to get a fix on is, was I bad?
No, are you kidding me? You think I would have? Of course not. You were great. You did a terrific job. You liked it a lot. You think you're doing something different now?
And Ira laughs, and he moves on to the next question quite quickly, and I had to pause, and I had to take a second. Because at that moment, you could hear in Ira's voice a little bit of a sense of insecurity, assuming he was bad, right? This was a thing of my past, something I could definitely feel. This thing that I've kind of put away into my past, this love for magic, that's a thing of the past. And then all of a sudden, this woman who I've never met spoke straight to my core about this exact topic. And she said, do you think you're doing anything different now? And I realized, no, I'm not. And so every time I'm trying to tell a story through film or even just live out my daily life, and I run into that darkness, if I can quest for that light, it makes all the difference. If I can recognize that contrast, if I can let that spark of magic be a synonym for hope, it changes everything. So I got to be honest with you, I kind of lied. This isn't a picture of me at 5. This is actually my son, Henry. And my son, Henry, just turned 5, and he's more obsessed with magic than I could have ever imagined being. Every day he's coming to me with a new trick that he invented, and to tell you the truth, they're horrible. And it makes it all the more amazing for me. And if you have kids, maybe you're familiar with that deep ache that they don't lose that innocence in them. And a little bit of you knows that they probably will. And that's the scariest feeling I've ever experienced. And so whenever I'm questioning that, I'm always asking, how do I keep the artist in this kid? How do I make it that he continues to be an artist when he grows up, right? That Pablo Picasso quote. And I think the answer is just to see that when he will face darkness, it's going to happen. And when he does, he just needs to be prepared with that little spark in that heart to embrace those darknesses and see the light, to be able to see that little spark as a synonym for hope. So I want to encourage you today, when you get home, pick up a paintbrush, pick up a camera, do something. The next time somebody asks you, are you an artist, say yes. And whoever it was that you were thinking of that gave you goosebumps, whether it was a song or a chef or whoever, tell them. Tell them you did something for me. Encourage them in their craft. And be sure to know that if you just recognize yourself as an artist and see that hope, that you can change yourself and you can change your story just by seeing every single little piece of darkness, that there's a light and that there is a sense of hope. Thank you.